So how was the food? Did you enjoy the lunch? Very good. They did a great job here at Eagle Eye. So now we're going to have Dennis Pennington. He's going to be back up here again, and he's going to provide us with information on the third full year of the Great Lakes Yen program. And Dennis just disappeared. Oh, there he is. Okay.
All right, everything I have is up on the screen. So, you guys get a lot out of that, did you? It helps to plug it in first, right? All right, now maybe we're seeing what's up on the screen. All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dennis Pennington, Weed Extension Specialist with Michigan State University, and I want to share with you some results and some trends and some things that we've seen in this yield enhancement network over the 3 years that we've had this project going. Over the 3 years, we've collected data. If you add all 3 years together, we've got about 295 sites worth of data during that 3-year period, and we have 3 different growing seasons, which we know growing seasons also play a role and impact, the results that we see in our wheat yields. So. If you have questions along the way, please holler at me. Jeff, if you want to keep me on track, give me like a 10-minute left and a 5-minute left. That would be great. But I want to have a discussion. So if you see something up here that you don't understand or you have a question, raise your hand or holler at me. Don't throw your water glass at me. So, okay. All right, so to get started, just a little bit of background. I think Jody covered this somewhat this morning. I am not the only one involved with Yen. We have a great team of people. In fact, in all my years working for MSU, this has probably been the best team of people that I've ever had the opportunity to work with. So, and we come from the Michigan side of things and Ontario, and we run it for the U.S. and for Canada. We got University of Guelph involved, the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture. So Peter has retired, and his successor, Joanna Follings, is my counterpart in Ontario. She sits on the planning committee with us here. But we meet once a week, every Friday morning at 8:30 to plan what we're doing, make sure we got data collection, we're getting reports out, we're answering the questions that growers have, we're trying to generate value for those that are in the program. So one of the things that I wanted to start out with, we licensed this Yen concept from the creators of this. Roger Sylvester Bradley is the person in the United Kingdom, in England, that started this whole program back in 2012. And what I wanted to do, he's got a short video that he recorded that talks a little bit about the Yen program from his perspective, why they started it, what they're seeing, what some of the trends are, because they've got 11 years worth of data now. And from there, and we're trying to hit 150, 160 bushel yield, and this year we actually hit 170. They're already there. They're wanting to hit 200, 225, even 250 bushel yield in the UK. So there's definitely some things that they know about wheat that we don't, that we can learn from them. So let me play this video a second, and this kind of will help set the stage.
Hello and Happy New Year to everyone. I'm Roger Sylvester Bradley.
Can you hear that okay?
I'm head of crop performance with ADAS in the UK. And it is a great pleasure and a privilege to be able to address you all on the other side of the Atlantic for your Yen meetings this January. I am really overjoyed that the Yen has persisted on this side of the Atlantic and that it is being found useful on the other side of the Atlantic. And I'm a great believer that agricultural progress has to happen by collaboration and cooperation. And I hope that in the future we can build links across the Atlantic and get to see ways forward that that happen faster, just because we have this wide perspective and we can see causes of variation and how therefore to make progress. So last year I spoke about how the yen began with a competition, but with explanatory measurements, and how we give all our entrants a very full report of how they yields were developed and how they can be explained. And I spoke about the extreme variation in yields that we're finding over here, and I imagine that you are finding with you over in the Great Lakes region. And here, our yields are varying. Obviously, they're a bit higher than with you, but they're still very variable, about threefold variation from something like 70 bushels per acre right up to over 220 bushels per acre. And we even include now this world record yield of 286 bushels per acre. So huge variation in yields. I spoke a bit about how we see a lot of variation in the nutritional status of the crops. As we analyze the grain, we see this quite big variation, and quite a lot of crops, 80% of crops show at least one deficiency, and half of the crops show more than one deficiency of one of the essential nutrients. Phosphorus nutrition is our biggest problem as far as we can see, not nitrogen, phosphorus. But what I thought I would put in front of you that this time is the feature that seems to come out of all our analyses of yen data, and in fact of other data sets, which I think is not really part of our currency, part of our discussion, and probably should be more of our discussion. So if I just share my screen with you and show you the one diagram that that I hope shows when we analyze the variation, what sort of what sort of factors get associated with that variation. So here is the pie diagram that describes all the variation and the degree to which each of the factors are associated with that variation. And you can see that the grey parts of the pie are things that we really can't control, the season and the interactions of the season with all the other features of a site and a crop. But the coloured slices of the pie are all things that we would regard as being to some extent controllable. So you can see there's a variety there, although a very thin slice, because all our growers choose very high yielding varieties. The regional effect, the manure and fertilizer effect, the previous crop and the soil effect. But in all these analyses, the slices vary in their size as we look at different sets of data, but always we have this big, what we now call a farm factor. And of course, we can't at the moment differentiate between the farm and the farmer. And it's not necessarily to do with the soil type, because of course we've already taken the soil type out. There may be features of the soil that we're not properly recognizing, but certainly in there is a farm and farmer factor. And we've really been pondering about this. And when we had our 10th birthday celebration last January, we had a whole session of our conference which was looking at the farm factor, and we had speakers from our levy organization, our Chekhov organization, a speaker from our primary advisory sponsor group, the Hutchinson's group, and we had a social scientist who we work with quite closely to to sort of suggest ideas of how come we're getting this farm factor. I mean, the example of the farm factor, the biggest example is that the same farm seems to, every time they enter the competition, they seem to win. And and of course, there are other farms that don't quite achieve that level of yield, but they're nevertheless, they're high-ranking farms or they're middle-ranking farms, and they tend to be continually ranking at the same sort of level. So it's something that we really do want to understand, and which means I think that we need to be looking at different aspects of these farms, particular aspects of these farms. And it would be really good to share with you and to hear what you think your ideas are about the farm factor. But anyway, that's enough from me. And thank you very much for your attention. I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll wish you a very good meeting. And I hope that we have chance for some discussion, some interaction into the future. So best of luck for 2024, and I hope it goes well for you. Thank you very much.
All right, so that was Roger Sylvester Bradley. He, like I said, is the one that kind of created this yen concept. He's a crop physiologist. He's the one that started this yen program back in 2012. So they have been instrumental, him and his team, in helping us get our program set up here as far as what data to collect, what samples to analyze, and then how to generate the report to get back to growers. And what I like about the direction that this is headed is this is becoming more of a global yen, and we're starting to talk about sharing information globally. I'll have the opportunity to go to Prince Edward Island the second week in March and visit with them. They have a yen there as well. And so if we can start collaborating and working together as an industry, I think we can learn from each other. And, you know, yes, this is built around a yield contest, but what I think is unique about the program, the folks that are involved in this one, they're willing to share what they're doing. Some yield contests, they're not going to tell you what the formula is or the secret or what they're doing to get the high yields. Here, it's an open book, and everybody wants to help everyone else in the program. If they've learned something on their farm, they share it. So he brought up a pretty important factor that I'm going to come back to here in this presentation, because what this presentation is about is what are the key things that we have learned after 3 years of the yen. So with that, I think Jody covered this. We've grown over we're into our 4th year now, and the geography seems to be expanding too. And there's interest of starting these yen projects in other geographies, kind of quite a ways outside of the Great Lakes region. But let's get into some data from the program, and because some of these are information that are I think an important part of the yield that these growers are getting. So this chart shows the different applications. So as you can imagine, with 156 farms in this program in 2023, we had some people putting on 1 fungicide, some putting on 2, some putting on 3, some doing different combinations. This slide shows what the farmers, those 156 farms, did. So, are you familiar with the timings, the T1, T2, and T3? T1 is early. That would be around the beginning of stem elongation. T2 is when the flag leaf is out, and then T3 would be your flowering fungicide application for head scab control. Okay. So this is the number of farms that were doing each of the different applications. The most popular one there with 51 farms is the T1 plus T3. The second most common with 41 farms is just a single application of the T3. Now, the green bars represent farms that only did 1 fungicide application. The blue bars, they did multiple applications or more than 1. So, and then we had a few that tried the T1, T2, T3, and then we had some that did just the T1. And so who do you think had the highest yield? Which of these had the highest yield? Any guesses? Probably the T3?
It's got to be the T1, T2, T3, or why did
Okay, so here we are. Okay, which one had the highest yield? So it was the one that had the T1, T2, and T3 with 123 bushel average yield on those 13 farms. So if you look at the most common, these two here, you got 120 on the T1, T3, 118.7 on the T3 alone. Is that, what is there, not even 2 bushels difference there between them? Is that enough to pay for that early fungicide? Maybe not. If you're using a generic product, possibly. What happened in this season that we had early in our season? Were we wet or dry? Yeah, we were dry. Okay, so when we're really dry, we would not expect to see as big of a response to the fungicide, right? So is that what's going to happen in 24? Yeah, I don't know. If you do know, you let me know, and then I can tell everybody else whether they should put a fungicide on or not. So there's one thing that's not represented up here. We had 18 growers that didn't put any fungicide on. What do you think their average yield was?
130.
You're going the wrong way. Their average yield was 98. Okay? So in a dry year that we had, and I had growers say, oh, it's so dry and we've been dry, we're getting close to our T3 fungicide application, I think I can skip it this year, right? Did fungicide make a difference? You bet it did. So my response to those growers were, go out and walk your field and look at your stand. If you have a stand that is hurt from the lack of moisture, and you're going to have below normal yields, subpar yields, don't waste your money on the fungicide. But if you walk your stand and you think you've got a good crop, get that fungicide on.
So Dennis, one other thing to point out that's really important is that the T3 is the winner pretty consistently. Like the later fungicide applications tend to be what pays the best. Your T1 is a bit of an outlier, but for the most part, right, that late fungicide pays.
Oh, so you're looking at this one being an outlier, you mean? Yeah. Yeah, so, and there's only 9 farms that did this, and so why they got that kind of a yield, I don't know. The other thing to remember, this is not research trials here. This is just reporting the sum and average of what all of these farms did on the 156 farms did in 2023. So, yeah, but the most common that probably pays dividends time after time is this T3. And then whether you get benefit from earlier depends on the season that you have and whether you have susceptible varieties and what diseases are present. Bill. So the question is, did we apply any fertilizer or any nutrient or anything else with these fungicides? And the answer is yes, but that varied from farm to farm. This does not look at what fungicide or what nutrients were applied with them. This is strictly looking at what did they do and whatnot. We have like what products they used. So if you wanted to say, well, what was the average yield of those that used product A or product B, we have that data. But this, what fertilizer they used is not factored into here. We will get into that though when Peter comes up and we do this farm by farm comparison that we're going to do here in a little bit. Other questions? Dates between T1, T3, it depends on the season. T1 would be about the beginning of stem elongation. That is usually in early April in Michigan. T3, that varies a little bit, but generally flowering occurs here around Memorial Day. Between Memorial Day and say the 3rd or 4th of June would be when the flowering is. So that's your range in dates. Yeah. Yeah.
That'd be a maximum, right? 50 days would be that's pretty wide.
Yeah, probably 50 days would be more like, because we're probably into April 10th maybe for Feek 6 on average. I could average what these growers are and report that. I have the data. Good question. Was it ground or aerial application? I'm not sure if we collected that data from the growers. I would say majority of the applications are ground application, but I do know we have some growers flying it on also. I know there's increased interest in these drone applications as well. I was out at one of our variety trials. They were putting urea fertilizer on with a drone on a field. So that's gaining in popularity. We were at the FHB forum in Cincinnati, and we had a discussion about drone application technology, and getting uniform coverage is way more of a challenge with a drone. But airplanes, no problem. But I can't say for sure what percent was aerial applied. Anything else? All right. So sunlight is also pretty important, right? Because what you're doing is harvesting sunlight energy and converting that through photosynthesis to create grain yield, right? So how much solar radiation your crop is able to capture is going to dictate what your yield potential is. So we track that in here. And we track it from green up to physiological maturity. So these numbers up here represent, so what is green up? Anybody know what green up is? When does green up occur? Okay. It might have already occurred, yeah, right. and it's supposed to be like, what, 57 out here? I don't see anybody out golfing out there yet, but the way we characterize green up is when we have 7 days in a row of positive heat unit accumulation, or positive GDD. We got to have 7 days consecutively where your average temperature is above freezing, okay? On that day, and we track that by Julian date of the year, that is green up. What is physiological maturity? It's when the stem turns yellow below the head, right? Okay, so when that happens, grain fill is over. There's no more translocation of nutrients to fill that grain. That basically the plant just then desiccates and dries down prior to harvest. So we track this solar radiation between those two stages, because that's basically the growing season in the spring for wheat, from green up to physiological maturity. So in 21, we had 20.8, and this is incident solar radiation, 17.7, and then 21.7, and then, so that's what's available to the crop. That's how much sunlight there was. So notice we had higher in 23 than we did the 2 previous years. Did you expect that? No, everybody talked about the Canadian wildfires, right? And that really reduced our solar radiation. Well, it may have reduced our solar radiation, but even with that, we had a lot more sunny days, and we still ended up with higher total solar radiation available to the crop. Yeah, so the timing of the smoke is important too, and help me remember, it was mid-June on? Is that when these wildfires happened? Late May? I don't remember for sure. It was in the latter part of wheat growth and development.
Most of the smoke here was mid-June and on.
Okay, so we were at either like mid-grain fill or toward the latter part of grain fill on from there. Okay, so intercepted solar radiation, that's where we ended up. In 23, we still ended up higher in 23 than we did the previous 2 years. If we break that out by state, these are all the states that participated in 2023. Which one had the lowest solar radiation? Kentucky. Yeah, where did we fall out there? Okay, so Michigan, we had 16, and this is terajoules per hectare. Terajoule is just a unit of measure. So we had 16. We weren't the highest. Looks like New York and Illinois had the highest, but we didn't fare too bad. What happened in Kentucky? Why is theirs so low? I didn't hear that.
Mountains.
Oh, mountains, yeah. Okay, we get shading effect. Yeah, they farm the mountainside, don't they? Yeah. So we also track water availability. So the first column is soil water holding capacity. We estimate that from the percent sand, silt, and clay in the soil test. And the middle column is the amount of rainfall. What do you notice about Kentucky? They had a lot more storm fronts go through. So that's the reason why they had less solar radiation, right? Is it? It's logical. It makes sense. Okay. But there's more to the story. Okay, remember, this is rainfall from green up to physiological maturity. How long is that period? Well, let's take a look. In 2022, the period from green up to physiological maturity, and my animation is off here, the period from green up to physiological maturity, these dates, these are the average dates by state, and then the average physiological maturity. So in this blue column, that's how many growing days that each of these states had. What do you notice? Where's Kentucky? In the sewer, yeah. They got a lot less days. This is 2023. Okay, so you compare these, it was 35 days less in 2022, 17 days less. So that is, we have it good compared to what they have. They have less time to try to create a high yield crop than what we do. So from the solar radiation and being able to capture that and convert that to grain yield, they've got to do it in a lot shorter period of time. So another thing, and I'll show you some results here from some of the high yield winners in a minute. There's a strong relationship, and we've seen this every year, between grain yield and biomass. So as biomass goes up, you'll see grain yield goes up as well. That's 2021, that's 2022, and that's 2023, okay? So I did this talk down in Kentucky, and they're double crop growers. They harvest their wheat in June, and they want to get back in there and plant soybeans immediately, okay? They don't want more residue, okay? But the fact is, if you want higher yields, you're going to have more residue, okay? And you need to think, this might be another way for you to think about your crop. To get high yields, I've also got to have higher biomass. How do I do that? What do I do on my farm to get higher biomass? Okay, you got to close that row earlier. You got to capture more sunlight energy. You got to have a healthy plant. You got to have adequate nutrients available, a good root system to take up water, as well as nutrients, so that you can get good growth and development. So the next thing that I think is really important is this density of the heads. And I have it reported in heads per meter squared because that's what UK does. So the Canadians think they have the ideal measurement system. Just because the rest of the world uses it doesn't mean it's what we need to use here, right? We did get the metric memo. We just ignored it. But so I mean, the numbers would be a little bit different if it was per square yard or square foot or whatever, but the concept is there's differences. So this is 2022 data with 98 farms. There was a 352 head difference, or about 60%. This is what it was in 2023 on the next 156 farms, 317 heads, or 57% difference. This is a big factor. You've got to be able to get this head density in order to get the high yield. And there's multiple things that impact this, as you might imagine. Seeding rate, row spacing, planting date. Probably planting date is one of the most important factors. You've got to get planted on time. But all of the things that you can do, you need to try to shoot for higher heads per meter squared. So I want to report some environmental factors here, because this is part of the data that you get back in the end. So on here, the first three charts, or first three sets of columns, are water related. SWHC is soil water holding capacity, and then rainfall, then total available water, and then that fourth, or that middle group, is estimated use of water. We do this top 20, bottom 20 comparison, where we take the average of the top 20 growers, compare them to the bottom 20. With 156 farms, that's 31. So the green represents the average of the top 31 farms. The blue represents the average of the bottom 31 farms in terms of yield. So they had a little bit more soil water holding capacity. The high yield guys had a little bit more rainfall, and they had a little bit higher total available water. Estimated use of water, we take their total amount pounds of biomass that they produced on a per acre basis, multiply it by 18 millimeters of water per ton of biomass to calculate what they used. This is what's pretty interesting. High yield guys use 96% of their water. Low yield guys use only 72% of their water. How important is that when we have a dry year? It's very important, okay? What are those high yield guys doing that they're able to utilize that water more efficiently? more roots, roots that are able to penetrate, so no compaction. Okay, yeah, so you think about all those things. Those all play a role in the crop's ability to produce high yield. So where do the top yields come from? Farmer factor. And we see that, and I don't know how to quantify that, and Roger alluded to this. In fact, in the one pie chart he had, it was 24% of the variability in yield was the farmer factor. And I think the farmer factor is things like they're always testing new products or practices or equipment on their farm, and they're making changes. They don't just run last year's program this year and from the year before. They're always looking for something different, and they're testing on their farm to try to figure out what can I do on my farm to get that next 4 or 5 bushels. And then if they can see consistent results, that becomes part of their standard program. And they're constantly testing, so they're constantly adding things to it, because getting high yield doesn't mean you're just going to go out and throw more nitrogen on and split it and put a fungicide on, and you're going to go from 90 bushels to 150. You're going to have to ratchet that up over years, over time. And it takes a combination of these factors that you ratchet that up and get to those higher yields. They pay attention to details. They do timely applications. They know what their soil test data is. They adapt to the season. They're constantly scouting their crop. They know what growth stages, where they're at. They can identify disease and nutrient problems. It's all of those things that contribute together to get to these higher yields. So I'll wrap up with I'll just give you a quick snapshot of the winners in this program. Some of these guys were also in the National Wheat Yield Contest as well, so you've seen the names before. Highest yield came from Jeff Cook in London, Ontario, with 173.4 bushel yield. Look at his biomass, 19,660 pounds per acre. Huge amount of biomass. Heads per meter squared was high. Planting date was early. And 1,000 kernel weight was also very high. And this was a water-limited site, okay, which means we measured the amount of water available in the soil plus rainfall. He only had 340 millimeters of water available to the crop, and you're going to see in the next one, that went up just a little bit, it went down just a little bit, 316 millimeters. In second place was Nick Sewin and Whalen with that 171 bushel yield, and look at his biomass, 19,437. He planted kind of more midstream. He didn't get it planted as early as he kind of wanted to, but his heads per meter squared and 1,000 kernel weight was also high. This is above ground biomass only. This does not include shoots. I don't have the staff or the money to do root characterizations. I can't do that. So in third place was Jeff with 167 bushel, 19,014 pounds of biomass, really high. He's planted early. He had a high number of heads per meter squared and high 1,000 kernel weight. Again, his site was also water limited, so if he would have had more water available, his yield probably would have been even higher. So this high biomass, getting planted early, and high number of heads are key drivers behind getting these high yields. And how am I on time? I'm about done, aren't I?
You're 1 minute over.
I'm 1 minute over? All right. Do you want to see what the highest percent of yield potential winners were? Yeah, okay. So we calculate each year on every farm in here what their theoretical maximum yield potential was based on how much solar radiation they have available, water they have available, and then we assume management would be perfect, so there's no nutrient deficiency, there's no disease problem, no compaction, we've got good drainage, there's no stress on the crop. So in a perfect scenario, what would that maximum yield potential be on your farm? And then we say, of that maximum yield potential, what did you actually get? What percent of that actual potential were you able to achieve? So, Mark Davis out of Napanee, Ontario, got 117% of his calculated yield potential. That is amazing. That's the highest we've ever had. And I would not expect to get that on a regular basis. I thought when I saw from the UK, they were hitting 98 to 100, 102%. I was like, we will never get there. But Mark was able to get there this year, and I think part of the discussion was The reason, look at how much water he had, 251 compared to what did your yield winners have? 304, 321. So he had even less water. I think he probably was able to draw moisture from deeper in the soil profile is the way he was able to get that percent of yield potential and get an actual yield of 160. So in second place was Jeff here. He had 107% of his yield potential there. And look at the amount of water he, quite a bit lower water available to that crop. And then in third place, also with 107% of the yield potential, was Wallace Lowen over by Middleton. Now his yield was 128, so he didn't get quite as high a yield, but his yield potential was only 119, partly because look at 220 compared to these other guys. He had even less water than all the other ones. So the YEN program helps us to generate all of this data that I've had up here. So everybody that's in the program will get these numbers for their farm. That's what I like about this. And then if you're trying to manage your farm, you need information, right? To make decisions and changes and decide what to do, you need information. We generate a lot of information with this program. So, question?
Back on that last one, even though he had like 120, that's still impressive for like no-till, because it just, hard ground, and depending on what he had in the last crop, well, that's impressive.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to discount that. So the comment was that 128 bushel with the rainfall and being no-till, that's a really good yield. And yes, that is a really good yield. I didn't mean to discount that at all. He's a great farmer, does a great job. But we're wanting to ratchet up, and we're going to want to continue to growing higher and getting even more yield out of this. So, but it's going to take a combination of all of these management practices and figuring out on your farm which ones work for you based on your environment, your soil type, your equipment, your management style, and so on, to figure out what is going to be the right combination of things, and we're just going to keep ratcheting up. Each year, the goal is to improve just a little bit more every year, and eventually we'll get where you want to be.
How big an area in the field do you take the yield from?
A good question. How big of an area do we take the yield from? We follow the National Wheat Yield Contest. 1.5 to 3 acres is the size. And there's a reason for that. We're pulling a soil sample, 2 tissue samples, grain sample, grab sample, grain sample, and we're analyzing all this. I don't want to pull that much sampling and have a whole lot of field variability impacting that. I want to know in this small little area where you've got a good yield, what does all this data tell us? If you go out and pull part of your tissue sample one time in a lower yielding area, you're going to get different results. It's going to impact that. So I know you have to manage variability in your fields as a grower, but for us to learn from this, we can't even begin to try to sample the variability that you have and try to draw some conclusions and learn from that. So we limit it so that it's a smaller area. So hopefully the variability within that 1.5 to 3 acre area is less than the whole field.
What are you doing on Sundays?
I'm sorry?
What do you do on Sundays?
What do I do on Sundays? I catch up on email and whatever needs to be done, I guess.
He gets the presentations ready for today.
Yeah. Any other questions? All right, Jeff, we ready to switch over?
Okay, thank you, Dennis. Let's give him a round of applause.